Welcome to part 2 of this series looking at what makes a good horror game. In the previous part of this series, we looked at what horror tropes I think are great in horror games, and what horror games I think are great, as well as why I love these games and what made them so great. If you haven't watched that series yet, I recommend watching it first as it's the first part in this series. And in this part, we'll be looking at the first 2 factors as to what I believe are the 5 main factors besides the other tropes I mentioned in the previous video that should be included in any horror game to make them truly scary and with lasting effect. In this video, we'll be covering part 1 and part 2, the feeling of isolation and vulnerability. So let's talk about why I think these are so important. Firstly, isolation. One of the biggest factors to feeling scared is the feeling of isolation, which is what almost every horror game does nowadays. Of course, because there are so many games out there that use this mechanic, it becomes harder and harder for this to be effective, or in a lot of cases, when the game starts, you're already alone, but you have no reason to be afraid yet. Of course, as the player, you know what you're in for in this game, but as the character, they have no reason to suspect anything yet. They have no reason to believe they're in danger. There are several games out there that leave the player either physically isolated or mentally isolated. Probably the best ones I can think of are Firewatch and Presentable Liberty, which are 2 games I want to talk so much more about in another video about how effective games can be at making you feel isolated and completely alone, despite the fact that you probably have family, roommates, partners, or neighbours less than a minute away. But that's another topic for another video. I digress. As for actual horror games, to call for ones I've already mentioned, Outlast, Dead Space, and Alien Isolation do pretty good jobs at making you feel isolated on your own. Even if you're with a team or party at the beginning of the game, they'll either be killed off or you end up getting separated by one means or another, where the only way you can contact them is over radio or phone or whatever communication device you may have in the game. But they can't help you. If you find yourself in a situation, it's up to you to find a way out on your own. Outlast, even though you're in a building full of people, none of them will help you, and you're on your own. Even though you're not physically isolated, mentally you are. Alien Isolation, on the other hand, physically isolates the player for a large majority of the game, where it's literally just you, the player, and the xenomorph. I mean, there's also the hostiles and the androids, but you get my point, right? Dead Space, on the other hand, has you in constant contact with other people over the radio, but never being able to actually reach them. As for why it's important to leave the player feeling isolated, isolation in some horror games is an amazing tool that can add to the overall feel of the game. You are alone. You can't rely on anyone else. You have to do it all on your own. If you mess up, no one can help you. All you have is what you have. And in most cases, the more isolated the player feels, the more powerless they feel. There are several ways to leave the player feeling isolated, ranging from having the game lose all their supplies to making the player have to explore unknown locations. A good way to reinforce the feeling of isolation is to allow the player to have something they can interact with, which may sound counterintuitive, but let me reiterate, not someone to interact with, something that either can't actually help them or later gets taken away. Think Tiny Box Tim from Mark's playthrough of Amnesia. It was just a cardboard box, but well, not even a cardboard box, it was a wooden crate, but it was lines of code. You get my point. Point being, it was nothing, but Mark built such an attachment to this little wooden box of just, man, I miss Tiny Box Tim. Different era. I miss that year of YouTube. How the world has changed. But I talk more about that in a video talking about forming bonds with inanimate objects in games. Go check it out after watching this series, it's pretty good. Even though I haven't actually finished writing it yet. But I know it's going to be good, so just take my word for it. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Or not. It's kind of a sad video actually. It'll kind of leave you feeling reflective at the end. It's a good video, but it's also a sad one. Point being, after you finish watching all these videos in this series, go check it out. I think it's great. Anyway, what to avoid when doing this? One of the biggest factors to avoid when isolating the player is to make the player feel powerful. If the player feels powerful, they won't be scared. Oh no, I'm trapped in a space station with a xenomorph. Oh, but don't worry, I've got a radar, night vision goggles, weapons, enough medicine to heal me from any injury, a flamethrower with enough resources in it to burn whatever I feel like, and still not worry about that. I mean, Alien Isolation doesn't do that, but I was using it as an example. But not to say you can't give the player power, but I'll talk more about that in vulnerability. So, when do you isolate the player and when do you not? Deciding this can be difficult. If the game always has you on your own, you get used to it. But if the game always has you on the radio with someone else, you won't feel isolated. The game needs to find this middle ground of allowing the player to talk to someone, but limit how much contact they have. The most common way games do this is to have a phone go out of range or lose signal. The other side of feeling isolated though is being vulnerable or feeling vulnerable. These are some of the big features to make me feel scared, because if I'm trapped in a mansion with demons, monsters, ghouls, zombies, or whatever it is, I should feel scared. Some examples of games that leave the player feeling vulnerable are, once again, Outlast, Subnautica, and Prey. Outlast makes you feel vulnerable by making the player physically powerless. Subnautica makes you feel vulnerable by placing the player in an unknown situation. And Prey makes you feel vulnerable by making you uncertain as to what's safe and what's not. In order for the player to feel vulnerable, there are several things a game can do. From the examples I just gave, there's physically making the player unable to fight back, so everything is a threat. Placing the player in a situation where they have no information, and the only way for them to survive is to risk their safety and explore. Or by placing the player in a situation where at any moment they could be in danger, and may be in danger without them even knowing yet. However, some additional ways they can do this include limiting the amount of supplies the player has, having enemies that are either unkillable or unkillable at this time, showing just how powerful the threat is, or cutting them off from the outside world, which goes back to making them feel isolated. Why is this important? Having the player feel vulnerable is massively important in horror games, as if they don't feel vulnerable, it's hard for them to feel scared. If I'm trapped in Area X, alone, isolated from the rest of the world, it's kind of hard for me to feel scared when I'm trained in hand-to-hand combat, self-defense, close combat, as well as carrying a combat knife and a fully reloaded magnum. And a handgun. And a crossbow. Submachine gun, shotgun, rocket launcher. Oh, and several grenades. Oh, and enough ammo to open a small shop. But if that's the case, should a game just strip the player of any ability to defend themselves? Well, you can, and in some games that works. For instance, Outlast is a game where from the get-go, it is clearly established you are an average person, not a hardened soldier, not a fanatic trained in all weaponry, not a genius able to make a trap out of a paperclip and some string. No, you are Miles Upshur, a completely average normal person. From the start of the game, it is made clear that all you can do is run, otherwise you'll be killed. And for Outlast, that works. However, these sort of games aren't without their flaws. If the player is unable to fight back, then they know whenever they encounter an enemy, the only thing they can do is run and hide, which creates this pattern in games. The player knows that all they can do is run away, and eventually it stops feeling vulnerable. You hear the music flare up and you just let out this sigh and go, okay, time for me to run away for 10-15 seconds or hide in the same spot for 10 or 15 seconds. Okay, cool, the threat's over. Carrying on. So, what? If a game gives you the ability to fight back, it doesn't work. And if the game doesn't give you the ability to fight back, it still doesn't work. Then what do you do? How do you do it? Well, I talk a lot more about this later on in the series, so I'll save it for then. However, Outlast doesn't just rely on running away. A lot of the game is too dark for you to see anything, so you have to use night vision on your camera to see where you're going. Unfortunately, you happen to have the cheapest batteries ever made, and the night vision drains your camera extremely fast. So you should only use it when you actually need it. However, if you are getting chased, you're probably going to need to use it to escape. But if you don't have any batteries, you can't use the night vision, which is where the fear comes in. Batteries are a rare commodity at Mount Massive Asylum, and you have to use them sparingly. Due to how fast the battery drains, you have to think carefully before you replace your battery. Yes, the battery starts flashing red and will run out in the next 45 seconds. But that still gives me 45 seconds or so of night vision. And I've only got one other battery, so I might as well drain this one. But what if I run into an enemy and need to switch it while I'm going? I won't be able to see where I'm going while I'm replacing the battery. And if I don't replace it, I won't be able to see, period. So what do? Batteries only last 2.5 minutes. Do I replace my battery that still has a fourth of its battery life left? If so, every 4 batteries or so, I'm losing one full battery. And what if I can't find another battery when I really need it? You could have had another full battery if you just waited, which is why Outlast works so well. Even if there's no threat, you still feel vulnerable if you have to use your battery, because you don't know if you'll need it later. But what if there's something in the dark? It's sort of that same concept as playing Pokemon when you were growing up, and you were saving up all your potions and your max revives and your burn heals and all this, just in case you may need it later, but then you never actually end up using it. You beat the game and realise, oh, I've got 400 max potions in my pocket right now because I never used them. Just, in this case, it's horror. You save them up in case you need them later, but never actually need them later on. So instead you just put additional stress on yourself for no reason. Which actually leads quite well into my next point. Logical reasoning. Which is what we'll be discussing and covering in the next part of this series, as well as suspense and how to use it and how not to. If you are enjoying this series, you know what to do. You can hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. It will allow you to see my video as soon as it comes out. If you did enjoy it, hit the like button. Obviously, I think that helps still. I don't know. Do likes actually do anything for the video anymore? I don't know. But hey, if you are enjoying it, share it with your friends. That does help, I'm pretty sure, because it creates engagement. I've been on this platform a long time and I still don't know how this platform works. And hey, as always, leave a comment below talking about what you think the other topics will be. I've got 3 more points I want to cover about the 5 main points. What do you think the other 3 are going to be? That's your assignment for today. Can you guess? I mean, if you've seen the thumbnails, you might be able to figure it out. Anyway, next time we'll be talking about 2 more of these points. And a video after that, we'll talk about the final point there, because these are big points. For now, thanks for watching. Next video is coming in a few days. Probably. And until then, happy Halloween? It's a bit early to say that, but hey, happy Halloween. You know, it's October. Happy Halloween. I'm covering horror videos. That's Halloween themed. Happy Halloween. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.